At dusk on a bridge, a wealthy man commits an unthinkable act against his autistic daughter, observed by a silent raven. But what seemed like solitary despair was, in fact, the tip of an iceberg of family cruelty. And the raven had seen more than just the fall. The icy night wind whipped Arthur's face as he drove back to the mansion, his hands trembling on the steering wheel. The image of his daughter's eyes, devoid of understanding yet filled with an innocence he had betrayed, was seared into his mind. Each bend in the road seemed an echo of the fall, each approaching headlight a silent judgment. He had done the unthinkable, and the weight of that act crushed him, a pain deeper than any grief. Upon arrival, the mansion was strangely silent, the living room lights on, inviting. Eleanor, his wife, appeared in the hall, wrapped in a silk robe, her eyes welling with a concern that seemed perfectly rehearsed. "Arthur, my love, you're freezing," she exclaimed, rushing to embrace him. Her touch was soft, but Arthur felt a shiver that wasn't from the cold. "I was so worried. The police called asking about our little one. They said it was a terrible accident. Are you all right?" He shook his head, unable to form words. The scent of her perfume, once comforting, now felt suffocating. "Eleanor," he began, his voice hoarse. I don't know what to say." She led him to the sofa, sitting beside him and holding his hands. "You don't need to say anything, my dear. I understand. The pressure, the stress, her condition. It was too much for any of us. You did what you could, Arthur. You always have." Her eyes, once filled with tears, now gleamed with a cold determination. "We need to be strong now. For us, for our family. No one needs to know the details. It was a tragedy, an accident. That's what we'll say." Eleanor's words were a poisoned balm, offering an escape route from guilt, yet simultaneously sealing the dark pact they had made. Arthur looked at her, searching for a remnant of the woman he had loved, but found only an impenetrable facade. He knew she was right, in a way. The truth was unbearable. While Eleanor cradled him in her web of comfort upstairs in a dimly lit room at the back of the house, Elias, Arthur's father, was alone. The old man, weakened by age and illness, tried to reach for the nightstand. His trembling hands fumbled for the vial of his vital heart medication. His vision was blurred, but he felt the lightness of the glass. Empty, completely empty. "Eleanor," he murmured, his voice weak, almost inaudible. "My medicine. I need my medicine." No one answered. The bedroom door was ajar, and the hallway light barely reached the corner where he lay. On the windowsill, a pair of bright black eyes watched. Shadow, the family raven, was there, as always. He had seen Arthur's wife, Eleanor, enter Elias's room earlier that day, pick up the vial, and with a cold smile empty the remaining contents into the trash before placing it back. Empty. Shadow tilted his head, watching Elias struggle to sit up, his breath ragged. The raven was a silent observer, an unintentional guardian of secrets. He had witnessed Eleanor's coldness, the way she ignored Elias's calls, the way she isolated him, cutting off his connections to the outside world. And now he saw neglect transform into something more sinister. With a swift, almost imperceptible movement, Shadow flew to the nightstand. With his strong beak, he picked up the empty medicine vial. It was light, weightless, a hollow symbol of a life being drained away. The raven held it firmly, with an intent that seemed to go beyond animal instinct, as if he knew what that object represented. He had seen the fall on the bridge, and now he saw the silent fall within the house itself. And he would not forget. As Eleanor cradled him in her web of comfort, Arthur felt increasingly suffocated. Her words, once a balm, now felt like sticky webs trapping him in a reality he refused to accept. He watched her, the facade of grief so perfectly constructed, her eyes gleaming with icy determination, and a shiver ran down his spine. "We can't let ourselves be defeated, my love," Eleanor continued, squeezing his hands. "We need to be strong, for us, for her memory. The world is cruel, Arthur. They wouldn't understand the burden we carried. Her condition, it was an ordeal for all of us. You did what was necessary." Hands, his skin tingling from her touch. "What was necessary?" he murmured, his voice almost inaudible. I pushed her, Eleanor. I threw her." Eleanor sighed, a melodramatic sound that seemed rehearsed. "No, Arthur, you let her go. It was a tragic accident, a fatality. The police have already accepted that version. No one can know. Think of our reputation, our standing. Think of how this would destroy us." She leaned in, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. "I took care of everything. The phone calls, the explanations. No one will suspect. Now we need to compose ourselves. Tomorrow, life goes on." Eleanor's words were a toxic blend of pragmatism and cruelty, wrapped in false concern. Arthur felt nausea rise, not just from guilt, but from the revulsion he was beginning to feel for her. The woman he loved had transformed into a cold strategist, capable of justifying the unjustifiable. He merely shook his head, unable to argue, his mind in a fog of despair. Upstairs, in a dimly lit room at the back of the house, Elias, Arthur's father, was alone. The darkness seemed to swallow him, and the silence of the house was broken only by the sound of his own ragged breathing. He tried once more to reach for the nightstand, his trembling hands fumbling in the emptiness. The vial was there, but it was too light, a hollow echo of hope. "Eleanor," he murmured again, his voice weak, almost inaudible. His chest ached, a growing pressure that prevented him from taking a deep breath. "My medicine." No one answered. He knew she was downstairs with Arthur. He had heard the car arrive, but his calls had been ignored for days. Food was left at the door, cold and uncaring. Calls to friends and doctors, intercepted. He was a prisoner in his own home. He had seen Eleanor's coldness, the way she ignored Elias's calls, the way she isolated him, cutting off his connections to the outside world. Elias coughed, a dry, painful sound that made him double over. The air seemed thin, his eyes, blurred by age and illness, fixed on the raven. Shadow tilted his head, as if understanding the old man's silent urgency, and he would not forget. With a low caw, Shadow spread his dark wings and flew out the window, the empty vial firmly clutched in his beak. He glided over the mansion's dark gardens, the night wind whipping his feathers. His destination was not his nest, but the living room, where Arthur still sat, his mind clouded by pain and Eleanor's manipulation. The raven flew directly to the open living room window, landing silently on the sill. He watched Arthur, whose gaze was lost in the fireplace's flames, and Eleanor, who was rising to pour a drink. With a final caw, Shadow released the vial. The small glass object fell onto the Persian rug, rolling gently until it stopped at Arthur's feet. The sound was almost imperceptible, but amidst the tense silence of the room, Arthur heard it. He looked down, and his eyes fixed on the empty vial, a somber omen the raven had delivered. Arthur's gaze, blurred by despair and the fog of Eleanor's manipulation, fixed on the small glass object resting on the Persian rug. It was unmistakable. Elias's medicine vial, his father's. The same shape, the same amber color, but it was empty, completely empty. A shiver colder than the night wind ran down his spine. Eleanor, who had just turned to grab the whiskey bottle, paused, noticing the abrupt change in Arthur's demeanor. Her eyes followed his gaze to the vial on the floor. A muscle in her jaw twitched imperceptibly. "What's this?" she asked, her voice a little sharper than usual, but quickly regaining her composure. "A bird brought this inside. How strange." Arthur didn't answer. He slowly bent down, his trembling fingers picking up the vial. The lightness of the glass in his hands was an overwhelming weight. He turned it over, searching for any remnants of pills, but there was nothing, only emptiness. "This is my father's medicine vial, Eleanor," he said, his voice low, almost a whisper but laden with a gravity that made Eleanor stop pouring the drink. "His heart medication. Why is it empty?" Eleanor approached, a forced smile on her lips. "Oh, that? It must be one of the old vials. I've already ordered the new prescription, my love. You know how disorganized your father is. He must have mixed up the vials or something." She tried to take the vial from his hand, but Arthur held it firmly. "No," Arthur retorted, raising his gaze to her. There was a dangerous flame in his eyes, a spark of distrust that guilt could no longer suppress. "I was with him this morning. He had some, and he told me he was almost out. He asked me to order more." The raven, Shadow, was still on the windowsill, observing the scene with his black, penetrating eyes. His presence was a silent reminder, a mute testimony that seemed to weigh in the air. Eleanor laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Arthur, my dear, you're exhausted. The tragedy. It's affecting your judgment. Your father is fine. I visited him earlier. He was sleeping peacefully." "Seafully," Arthur repeated, anger beginning to bubble beneath the surface of his despair. "I heard him cough. He called me. I heard him ask for you, Eleanor, and you didn't go." Eleanor shrugged, her expression hardening slightly. "I was busy with the arrangements, Arthur, with the police, with everything you couldn't do. Someone had to keep up appearances, didn't they? And your father. He's an elderly man. Sometimes he gets confused. He has everything he needs." "Needs?" Arthur stood up, the empty vial still in his hand. "Eleanor, he has a severe heart condition. These medicines aren't everything he needs, and they're what keeps him alive. And this vial is empty, completely empty." Eleanor's facade finally began to crack. Her eyes narrowed. "Don't be dramatic, Arthur. I already told you I ordered the prescription. It must be on its way. Or maybe he hid the other vial somewhere. He does these things." "These things!" Arthur exploded, his voice echoing in the room. The image of Elias, weak and alone in the dark room, superimposed itself on the image of his daughter on the bridge. The guilt for one seemed to merge with the guilt for the other, and his anger at Eleanor grew exponentially. "Eleanor, you isolated him. You intercepted his calls. You left him alone without his medicine." Eleanor took a step back, her expression now one of pure coldness. "I protected him, Arthur, from people who wanted to take advantage of his fragility, from you, who were so consumed by your own misery that you couldn't see what was happening right under your nose. I took care of everything." "Took care of everything?" Arthur approached her, the empty vial like a silent weapon in his hand. "You left him without his vital medicine. Are you letting him die, Eleanor, just like you convinced me to let go of our daughter?" The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the sound of Arthur's ragged breathing. Eleanor stared at him, her mask of virtue finally undone, revealing the cold cruelty behind it. Her lips curled into a glacial smile. "I merely accelerated the inevitable, Arthur," she whispered, her voice laden with venom. "Both for your daughter and for your father. They were dead weight, Arthur. Burdens that prevented us from living the life we deserve. I freed you, and now you dare to question me?" Arthur felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. Eleanor's words were a direct blow, unraveling not just neglect, but a calculated and perverse intention. The raven on the windowsill let out a low caw, like a lament, before taking flight into the night's darkness, leaving Arthur alone with the terrible truth and the empty vial in his hands. Eleanor's web was not one of comfort, but of death, and he had been a puppet in her macabre game. The air in the room seemed to freeze. Arthur couldn't breathe. The image of his daughter, The smile he had tried to erase from memory now superimposed itself on the pale, suffering face of his father, Elias. Both images, blurred by the fog of Eleanor's manipulation, became sharp, painfully real. He had been blind. No, worse than blind. He had been an accomplice, a puppet, as she herself had said, dancing to the macabre tune she played. "I freed you." Her words echoed in the room, each syllable a stake through Arthur's heart. He looked at her, and for the first time, he didn't see the woman he loved, but a monster with whom he had shared his bed, his life, and now the guilt for unspeakable acts. The empty vial in his hand seemed to burn, a silent testament to his blindness and her malice. You're a demon," Arthur managed to stammer, his voice hoarse, almost unrecognizable. He felt a knot in his throat, a mixture of nausea and rage that threatened to explode. "My daughter, my father? You saw them as burdens? How could you?" Eleanor stepped forward, her expression unwavering. "I saw them as reality, Arthur. The reality you refused to see. A child with special needs who would never allow us to have the life I dreamed of. A sick old man who drained our energy, our time, our fortune. I did what was necessary to protect our future, our empire." "Our empire." Arthur laughed, a dry, humorless sound that turned into a sob. "You destroyed everything, Eleanor. You destroyed me. You made me participate in something I never thought I'd be capable of." He squeezed the vial so hard his knuckles turned white. The physical pain was a welcome relief from the excruciating agony in his soul. "You made your choices, Arthur," she retorted, her voice now stronger, more assertive. "I merely presented the options. You were weak. You were a coward. You let emotion sway you. I am the strength here. I am the mind that truly thinks." With each word, the truth solidified, heavy and undeniable. Arthur staggered backward, feeling dizzy. The room, the fireplace, the luxurious furniture, everything seemed to spin. He had trusted her, loved her, defended her, and she had used him, transformed him into a tool for her own perverse ends. "My father," he murmured, his mind returning to Elias, alone and helpless in the dark room. The urgency to act struck him like lightning. He couldn't stay there any longer, not for another second. He had to save him. Eleanor noticed the change in his gaze, the spark of determination beginning to replace despair. "Where do you think you're going?" she asked, her voice low, but with a veiled threat. "Don't think you can just run away now, Arthur. You're as involved as I am. No one would believe you. You're the father who accidentally let his daughter fall. You're the son who neglected his father." Arthur met her gaze, and for the first time, there was no fear, only a cold, burning resolve. "I don't know what I'm going to do, Eleanor," he said, his voice firm despite the pain. "But I know what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to be your puppet anymore, and I'm not going to let my father die." He turned abruptly, the empty vial still in his hand, a symbol of his new and terrible clarity. His steps were heavy, but determined, as he headed for the living room door. "You'll regret this, Arthur," Eleanor said, her voice icy and sharp, a warning that seemed to pierce the night's darkness. "You don't know who you're dealing with." Arthur didn't look back. He knew exactly who he was dealing with, and he knew that for the sake of his soul and for his daughter's memory, he needed to confront the monster he had created. He ran up the stairs, his heart pounding, no longer from guilt and despair, but from a new and fierce determination. He had to reach his father, before it was too late. He had been blind. "I freed you. You, my daughter, my father. You saw them as burdens. How could you? You destroyed me. You made me. You were weak. You were a coward. I am the strength here." He had to save him. Arthur ascended the stairs, each step an echo of the urgency consuming him. The mansion's luxury, once a symbol of his success and happiness, now seemed a gilded cage, suffocating and full of dark secrets. The Persian rugs beneath his feet, once soft, now felt rough, each fiber scratching at his conscience. His heart beat erratically, a drum of guilt and terror. He could hear Eleanor's words reverberating in his mind, her voice icy and sharp, a warning that he was as trapped as she was. But the image of Elias, frail and alone, superseded any threat. He reached the second-floor hallway, where the darkness seemed denser. His father's bedroom door was ajar, a sliver of darkness that seemed to suck away the faint light from the living room. A shiver ran down his spine. He hesitated for an instant, the fear of what he would find battling against the desperate need to act. He took a deep breath, the smell of mold and stagnation already reaching his nostrils, and pushed the door open. The room was plunged into an oppressive gloom. Heavy curtains blocked any trace of the night's light, and the air was heavy, cold, almost unbreathable. Arthur fumbled along the wall for the light switch, his fingers trembling. When the faint light of the bedside lamp flickered on, it revealed the scene he had dreaded. Elias lay in bed, huddled under a thin blanket, pale and motionless. His face was sunken, his lips dry and cracked. His breathing was shallow, almost imperceptible. The room was disheveled, with some empty glasses and crumbs of dry food on the nightstand, evidence of the neglect Eleanor had imposed. The smell of urine and old medicine hung in the air, a silent testament to the abandonment. "Father," Arthur called, his voice choked, barely recognizable. He rushed to the bed, kneeling beside it. He reached out a trembling hand to touch Elias's forehead. It was cold, clammy. A chill ran through Arthur. "Father, can you hear me?" There was no response. Elias remained motionless, his eyes half closed, his skin almost translucent. Arthur felt a cold panic grip his chest. He took his father's pulse, searching for a beat, and for a moment feared the worst. Finally, he felt a faint, irregular pulse. A gasp of relief, mixed with horror, escaped his lips. The empty vial, still in his hand, seemed to weigh a ton. That small plastic container, once a mere object, was now irrefutable proof of Eleanor's cruelty. She had left his father to waste away, slowly, methodically, just as she had planned his daughter's accident. The image of his little girl, smiling and playing, merged with the sight of his father on the brink of death. The pain was unbearable. "My God, Father, what have I done?" Arthur murmured, tears streaming freely down his face. Guilt crushed him. He had been blind, deaf, a manipulated fool. He had allowed this to happen, allowed the woman he loved to destroy his family, piece by piece. He stood up abruptly, his mind in a whirlwind. He needed help, immediately, but who to call? A doctor? And how would he explain his father's condition? Eleanor's words returned. "No one would believe you." He looked at the empty vial again. There was no longer any doubt. Eleanor was a monster, and he, Arthur, had been her accomplice. But no more. He could no longer afford to be weak or cowardly. He had to protect his father, and then he would have to confront Eleanor, no matter the consequences. His eyes swept the room, searching for something, anything. He noticed a small movement at the window. The raven was there, perched on the outer sill, watching him with its black, penetrating eyes. The bird, his faithful messenger, had played its part. Now, the responsibility was entirely Arthur's. "I'm going to get you out of here, Father," Arthur promised, his voice firm, determination burning in his tear-filled eyes. "I'm going to fix this. I swear." He picked up the landline beside the bed, the dusty, almost forgotten device. He dialed the emergency number, his hands still trembling, but with a new and fierce resolve. As he waited for the connection, he looked at his father, then at the empty vial, and finally at the raven in the window. The battle was just beginning. and he knew it would be the hardest of his life. But, for the first time in a long time, Arthur felt a spark of hope, a strength he thought he had lost forever. He was not alone, and he would not surrender. Arthur dialed the emergency numbers, his hands still trembling, but with a new and fierce resolve. The voice on the other end, calm and professional, contrasted brutally with the chaos in his mind. "Emergency. What's your emergency?" "My father. He's very ill," Arthur managed to say, his voice choked, barely recognizable. He's not responding. I think he needs a doctor. Urgently." He provided the address, the description of Elias's condition, the lack of medication. Each word was a dagger in his own chest, a silent confession of his failure. As he waited, he knelt again beside the bed, holding Elias's cold hand. "Hold on! Father, please, hold on!" Minutes that felt like an eternity passed. The sound of sirens tore through the night silence, growing in volume until they stopped abruptly in front of the mansion. Arthur ran to the front door, opening it before the doorbell could even ring. 2 paramedics, a man and a woman, hurried in, carrying their equipment bags. "Where is the patient, sir?" asked the female paramedic with a serious and professional expression. "On the 2nd floor, in the bedroom," Arthur indicated, guiding them. He's very weak. He hasn't taken his medicine for days, I think." The last part came out almost as a whisper, shame burning in his throat. In the bedroom, the faint light of the lamp revealed the gravity of the situation. The paramedics acted with silent efficiency. One of them checked Elias's vital signs, while the other prepared an intravenous line. "He's dehydrated and his blood pressure is very low," said the paramedic, his gaze fixed on Elias. "How long has he been like this?" Arthur hesitated. How could he explain? I don't know exactly. I thought he was just sleeping more. My wife, she was taking care of him." The lie, even if partial, tasted bitter in his mouth. But he couldn't show all his cards at once, not with Eleanor still in the house. The female paramedic raised an eyebrow, a look of distrust that Arthur couldn't ignore. "And the medication? Does he have any chronic conditions?" Arthur held out the empty vial. "Yes, for his heart and for his blood pressure. This is the vial. It's been empty for days, I only just realized." He felt the weight of judgment on his shoulders. "Sir, it's important that we know the complete history. Medication neglect can be very dangerous, especially for the elderly with heart problems." Her voice was firm, but not accusatory, just professional. "I know," Arthur replied, his voice choked. I failed him. I was blind." They stabilized Elias enough to transport him. As they carefully placed him on the stretcher, Arthur watched every movement, his heart heavy. The raven, still on the windowsill, seemed to watch too, a silent witness to the entire drama. "We're taking him to Central Hospital. Would you like to accompany him?" asked the paramedic. "Yes, of course," Arthur said immediately. He needed to be with his father. As they descended the stairs, Arthur felt Eleanor's gaze. She stood at the top of the staircase, a dark silhouette against the dimness of the hallway, her eyes glinting in the dark. There was no anger, only a calculating coldness that sent a shiver down his spine. She didn't say a word, merely watched the scene unfold. At the hospital, the emergency room was a whirlwind of activity. Elias was taken to an intensive treatment area. Arthur filled out forms, answered more questions. The story he told was a diluted version of the truth, a desperate attempt to protect his father, and at the same time not incriminate himself irreversibly before he could plan his next steps. A doctor came to speak with him. "Your father is in serious condition, sir. Severe dehydration, malnutrition, and a cardiac crisis triggered by the lack of medication. He was lucky to have arrived in time. We'll need a few days to stabilize him and run a battery of tests." Will he be all right?" Arthur asked, his voice almost a whisper. The doctor sighed. It's too early to say, but we're doing our best. It's crucial that he receives proper care from now on. Arthur sat in the waiting room, the empty vial still in his hand, now a somber talisman. Guilt gnawed at him, but determination was stronger. He had allowed Eleanor to do this. He had been a puppet, a coward, but no more. The image of his daughter, his father's pale face, Eleanor's coldness, everything merged into a single, powerful conviction. He wouldn't go back to that house, not to the woman who had destroyed his family. He would stay at the hospital, take care of his father, and then he would confront her. Not as a puppet, but as the man she had underestimated. He picked up his cell phone, dialing his lawyer's number. The battle was just beginning, and he was ready to fight. The Raven, he imagined, would be watching, waiting, and Arthur wouldn't disappoint him. The darkness in the mansion's hallway deepened, swallowing the faint light from the living room. Arthur hesitated before his father's half-open bedroom door, a sliver of shadow that seemed to suck away hope. A shiver ran down his spine, fear battling against the urgency to act. The room was plunged into gloom. The faint light of the bedside lamp revealed Elias huddled under a thin blanket, pale and motionless, his face sunken, lips dry and cracked, his breathing shallow, almost imperceptible. The room disheveled, empty glasses and crumbs, evidence of Eleanor's neglect. The smell of urine and old medicine hung in the air. "Father," Arthur called, his voice choked. He rushed to the bed, kneeling. He touched Elias's forehead, cold, clammy. "Father, can you hear me?" There was no response. Elias remained motionless, cold panic. He took his father's pulse, fearing the worst. A gasp of relief, mixed with horror. The empty vial in his hand weighed a ton, irrefutable proof of Eleanor's cruelty. She had left his father to waste away methodically, just as she had planned his daughter's accident. The pain was unbearable. "My God, Father, what have I done?" Arthur murmured, tears streaming. Guilt crushed him. He had been blind, a manipulated fool. He stood up abruptly. He needed help. Eleanor's words echoed, "No one would believe you." But there was no longer any doubt. Eleanor was a monster, and he, Arthur, her accomplice. But no more. He could no longer be weak. The Raven was on the outer sill, watching him. The bird, his faithful messenger, had played its part. Now the responsibility was Arthur's. "I'm going to get you out of here, Father," Arthur promised, his voice firm, determination burning in his eyes. "I'm going to fix this, I swear." He picked up the landline, dialing the emergency number, his hands trembling, but with fierce resolve. The calm, professional voice on the other end contrasted with the chaos in his mind. "My father. He's very ill," Arthur managed to say. "He's not responding. He needs a doctor, urgently." He provided the address and Elias's condition. Each word was a dagger in his chest, a silent confession of his failure. Minutes that felt like an eternity. The sound of sirens tore through the night's silence, stopping abruptly in front of the mansion. Arthur ran to the front door. 2 paramedics hurried in. "Where is the patient, sir?" asked the female paramedic. "On the 2nd floor," Arthur indicated. "He's very weak. He hasn't taken his medicine for days, I think." Shame burned. In the bedroom, the paramedics acted with efficiency. "He's dehydrated and his blood pressure is very low," said the paramedic. Arthur hesitated. I don't know exactly. My wife. She was taking care of him." The lie, even if partial, tasted bitter. The female paramedic raised an eyebrow. "And the medication?" Arthur held out the empty vial. "Yes, for his heart. It's been empty for days. I only just realized." He felt the weight of judgment. "I know," Arthur replied. I failed him. I was blind." They stabilized Elias for transport. As they placed him on the stretcher, Arthur watched, his heart heavy. The raven, still on the windowsill, watched too. She stood at the top of the staircase, a dark silhouette, her eyes glinting. There was no anger, only calculating coldness. She didn't say a word, merely watched. At the hospital, Elias was taken for intensive treatment. Arthur filled out forms, responding with a diluted version of the truth, trying to protect his father and not incriminate himself. Severe dehydration, malnutrition, and a cardiac crisis due to lack of medication. He was lucky. We'll need a few days to stabilize him. Will he be all right? Arthur asked. The doctor sighed. It's too early to say. Arthur sat in the waiting room, the empty vial in his hand, a somber talisman. He had been a puppet, but no more. Everything merged into a powerful conviction. He picked up his cell phone, dialing his lawyer's number. Cell phone in hand, cold sweat trickling down his palm. His lawyer's voice, Dr. Mendez, sounded on the other end of the line, calm and professional, a stark contrast to the storm raging within Arthur. Arthur, your call at this hour is a surprise. Has something happened? Yes, Dr. Mendez. It has. My father. He's in the hospital, in serious condition. Neglect. The word came out with difficulty, a knot in his throat. My wife, Eleanor. She left him without his medicine, for days, without food, without water. I only just realized. There was a pause on the other end. Neglect? That's very serious, Arthur. Do you have proof? Arthur looked at the empty vial in his hand. I do, the heart medicine vial, empty, and his condition. The doctors confirmed severe dehydration, malnutrition, cardiac crisis, all due to lack of medication. I see. This constitutes a case of elder abuse, Arthur. And you're directly implicating your wife. Mendez's voice was cautious but firm. Yes, she was solely responsible for him. She isolated me, Dr. Mendez, kept me away from my father, from my daughter, from everything. She created a facade of virtue, but she's a monster. Anger and pain mingled in Arthur's voice. I want a divorce, and I want her to pay for this, for everything she's done. Arthur, a contested divorce, especially with accusations of abuse, will be complicated. We need a solid strategy. First, we need to ensure your father's safety. Second, protect your assets and his. Third, gather all possible evidence against Eleanor. I don't care about her money, Dr. Mendez. I just want justice, and I want her exposed. I was a fool, a puppet, but no more. Arthur took a deep breath, his daughter's image coming to mind. And there's something else, Dr. Mendez. My daughter, her accident on the bridge, I'm not sure it was an accident. Another pause, longer this time. Arthur, that's a very serious accusation. Do you have any basis for it? No, not directly. But the way she acted, how she manipulated me into believing it was best for her. And now, seeing what she did to my father, I feel she's capable of anything. I need you to investigate. Everything. All right, Arthur. I understand the gravity of the situation. First, I'll send an assistant to the hospital to get all your father's medical reports. Then, I'll initiate the divorce proceedings and a protective order for your father. As for your daughter, that will require a more delicate investigation. We can't make accusations without concrete evidence, but we can raise questions and request a re-evaluation of the case if there are indications. Do whatever it takes, Dr. Mendez. I trust you. Arthur hung up, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders, but another, even heavier, settle in. The battle would be long and painful. Meanwhile, at the mansion, Eleanor watched the emergency vehicle lights disappear into the distance. A cold, calculating smile played on her lips. Arthur had finally woken up, she realized. What a shame. He was always so predictable, so easy to manipulate. But now, he had crossed a line. She knew he would call a lawyer. She had already anticipated it. Eleanor walked to the library, opening a hidden safe behind a bookshelf. From it, she withdrew a thick folder full of documents, contracts, bank statements, old emails. She had always been meticulous. Arthur thought he knew her, but he had barely scratched the surface. She had her own secrets, her own weapons, and she was ready to use them. War had been declared. Back at the hospital, Arthur sat beside Elias's bed, watching his father's chest rise and fall rhythmically, now with the help of machines. Guilt still gnawed at him, but determination was a burning fire in his chest. He had failed his daughter, his father, but he wouldn't fail anymore. The raven landed on the windowsill of Elias's room, observing Arthur with its penetrating eyes. Arthur looked at the bird and for a moment felt a deep connection. The raven had been the silent witness, the messenger of truth. Now, Arthur would be the executor of justice. He promised himself he wouldn't rest until Eleanor paid for every act of cruelty. He would protect his father, and if there was any chance, any slightest hope, he would discover the truth about his daughter. The night would be long, but dawn would bring a new fight, and Arthur was ready. "I'm so sorry I was blind. For you, for my daughter." "Mr. Campbell, the doctor said the recovery will be long and uncertain." Arthur nodded, the news tightening his chest. "Whatever it takes." "Of course, Mr. Campbell. Always so predictable, so sentimental. Did he think he could surprise me?" She picked up the phone, dialing a number she knew by heart. "Dr. Valerio, Arthur is being dramatic." The voice on the other end was grave and professional. "Eleanor, what are the accusations?" "Elderly neglect, attempted contested divorce, and most ridiculously, he's questioning his daughter's accident. He's unbalanced. We need to act fast to protect my interests and, more importantly, my reputation." "Understood. We can use this to our advantage to discredit him." "Excellent, Dr. Valerio. Prepare the counter-offensive." Mendez was already in action. Arthur released his father's hand, the wrinkled, cold skin a poignant reminder of lost time. Guilt still gnawed at him, but anger, a cold, constant flame, now surpassed it. He turned to the raven. The bird, as if sensing the change in atmosphere, tilted its head again, its black eyes gleaming in the room's dim light. "You saw, didn't you?" Arthur whispered, his voice hoarse. "Everything. And now you're going to see justice." The raven let out a low caw, almost like a response, before flying silently out the open window, disappearing into the night's darkness. Arthur felt a shiver. It was a sign, he thought, a premonition that the battle had begun. He called the nurse again. "Please ensure my father has the best doctors, the best care, spare no expense, and please keep him safe. No one, absolutely no one, should have access to him without my express permission." The nurse, accustomed to the seriousness of millionaires, nodded promptly. "Understood, Mr. Campbell. He'll be under constant surveillance." Arthur nodded, a last glance at Elias, and left the room, his firm steps echoing in the hospital's silent corridor. He picked up the phone, dialing Dr. Mendez's number. It was late, but the urgency couldn't wait. "Dr. Mendez, this is Arthur Campbell. We need to meet immediately. I have crucial information and I need your help to act." Arthur's voice was calm, but laden with an iron determination. On the other end of the line, Dr. Mendez, who was still in his office, reviewing the initial reports on Elias, answered, "Mr. Campbell, I was expecting your call. Where can we meet? My home is discreet, or I can come to you." "My house isn't safe. Meet me at a neutral location. Do you know the corner cafe near Central Park? In 30 minutes? "I'll be there," Mendez replied, sensing the urgency in Arthur's voice. He knew the real fight was about to begin. As Arthur headed for the meeting, at the mansion, Eleanor finished her call with Dr. Valerio. A cold smile played on her lips. Arthur is a fool. He thinks he can bring me down, but he doesn't know who he's dealing with. She stood up, walking to the library window, observing the darkness of the garden. He'll regret challenging me. I'll make sure he loses everything, his reputation, his fortune, and what's left of his sanity. Dr. Valerio, a cunning and unscrupulous lawyer, was already mobilizing his team. Eleanor, prepare for war. Arthur isn't as naive as you think. He has Dr. Mendez by his side, and Mendez is a formidable adversary. We need to strike first and hard. I'll leak some information about Arthur's history of emotional instability to the press. We'll paint him as an unbalanced man, consumed by grief, who is fabricating accusations to get revenge on you. Excellent, Valerio. Use everything you have. I want him ridiculed. I want no one to believe a word he says. Eleanor laughed, a dry, joyless sound. And what about the daughter? Is he really questioning that? Yes, he is, but without a body, without witnesses, it's just a conspiracy theory. We can use that to reinforce the narrative of his instability. No one will believe you'd be capable of such cruelty. You're the victim here, Eleanor. The devoted wife who lost her stepdaughter and is now being attacked by an unbalanced husband. Eleanor smiled, satisfied. Perfect. Let the show begin. At the corner cafe, Arthur waited. With each passing minute, his determination solidified. He was no longer the blind, manipulated man. He was a father seeking the truth and a son seeking justice. The night was dark, but the light of truth, he knew, would eventually break through the shadows. The battle would be brutal, but Arthur was ready to fight to the end. At the corner cafe, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the palpable tension. Arthur arrived first, sitting at a discreet table in the corner, his eyes sweeping the room with an intensity he hadn't possessed in years. Every fiber of his being cried out for action, for justice. Exactly 30 minutes later, Dr. Mendez entered, his keen gaze finding Arthur immediately. He sat down, without preamble. Mr. Campbell, thank you for coming. Your father's situation is serious but stabilized. We have enough to initiate the protective order process and the neglect charges, but against Eleanor. That's another story. Arthur nodded, his jaw clenched. I know, she's cunning. But I'm certain, Dr. Mendez, that she's behind what happened to my daughter. It wasn't an accident. I was manipulated, blinded by my own grief and her facade. Mendez sighed, the seriousness on his face deepening. Mr. Campbell, I understand your pain and your conviction, but legally, without a body, without witnesses, without any physical evidence, it's just your word against hers. And she's already moving to discredit you. My assistant informed me that rumors are already circulating about your emotional instability after the loss of your daughter. Anger bubbled in Arthur, but he contained it. I know. She's always been like this, but I won't stop. There has to be something, some proof. As they spoke outside the cafe window, a dark shape landed on the sill. It was the Raven. Its black, intelligent and penetrating eyes fixed on Arthur. In its beak, it carried something small and cylindrical. Arthur, feeling a shiver down his neck, turned. His eyes widened at the sight of the bird. The Raven, he murmured, almost inaudible. Dr. Mendez, curious, followed Arthur's gaze. The Raven, with a swift and deliberate movement, released the object it carried, letting it fall onto the sidewalk just below the window. Then it took flight, disappearing into the night's darkness as silently as it had arrived. Arthur, without hesitation, stood up and rushed out of the cafe. He knelt, picking up the object. It was a small medicine vial, empty. The label, though a bit worn, was unmistakable. Elias Campbell's Heart Medicine, he read aloud, his voice choked. Daily dose. Refill needed in. 3 weeks ago. Dr. Mendez, who had followed him, picked up the vial, his eyes narrowing. This is This is the proof, Mr. Campbell. The empty vial, the refill date expired weeks ago. This is criminal neglect. It's the evidence we needed for Elias. Arthur felt a wave of shock and relief mixed with deep pain. The raven, it had played its part. She left him without his medicine. She was slowly killing him. Mendez picked up the phone. This changes everything. With this, we can get a search warrant for the mansion, investigate her accounts, everything. The story of your daughter. Now we'll have the leverage to go after that too. No one will believe that a woman capable of letting her own father-in-law die from lack of medicine wouldn't be capable of something even worse. At the mansion, Eleanor was toasting with a glass of expensive wine. News about Arthur's nervous breakdown was already beginning to circulate on some blogs and gossip sites. Valerio is a genius, she thought, a victorious smile on her lips. Arthur is finished, but her celebration was short-lived. The phone rang. It was Dr. Valerio, his voice now tense and hurried. Eleanor, we have a problem. A big problem. The police have a search warrant for the mansion. It seems Arthur found your father-in-law's medicine vial, the empty one, and the refill date expired. The wine glass slipped from Eleanor's hands, shattering on the floor. Her blood ran cold. What? How? That's impossible. It doesn't matter how, Eleanor. They have the proof. And with that, Arthur's credibility increases exponentially. They'll investigate everything, the accounts, the emails, the daughter's accident. Everything. Eleanor's world crumbled in an instant. The facade of virtue, the web of lies, everything collapsed like a house of cards. Her victorious smile transformed into a mask of terror. At the hospital, Arthur was beside Elias's bed. The empty vial was in an evidence bag that Dr. Mendez had already taken to the police. Justice for Elias was on its way. And as for his daughter, hope, once a faint thread, now ignited like a flame. He knew the truth would be painful, but it was the only way to find peace. He looked at the window. The raven wasn't there, but Arthur felt its presence, a silent guardian that had brought light into the darkness. The battle wasn't over, but the tide of the war had turned. Eleanor would be exposed, and Arthur finally would begin to rebuild his life, one brick at a time, honoring his daughter's memory and his father's life. The night was dark, but the dawn of truth was finally on its way.